Is pro-Palestinian support tone deaf to the plight of Israelis? This is an interesting question. How can it be tone deaf? Because it's been shaped by the very context of what has been done to Palestinians at the behest and by Israeli leadership. Zionist strategy. But we have to ask a counter question. When an individual is in pain or mortally wounded, does he, she have time to focus on the pain and suffering of the one who inflicted that injury upon them in the first place? We need to think about this really carefully. So the aggressor has suffered a wound as a result of the attack, the subjugation, the injury of the victim, the first victim. And that victim can only focus on the injury they've sustained. They have no time to look or consider others. And while I've brought a micro example, an individualistic example, let's expand that to a macro level now. Palestinians, by virtue of the time that has passed and the period of subjugation that they've faced, while dealing with that loss, those losses, and the continuing losses of generations that's taking place now with the genocidal actions that we're seeing upon them, still have consideration for their neighbors. And what's the proof of that? We're seeing women, children, men, homeless, destitute, suffering from starvation, and they're not speaking with the language of hatred or revenge regarding those who have done that to them. So I've brought a micro example, an individualistic example, which would be a natural response. But we are not seeing that natural response from the Palestinians. We're seeing that they want peace. They want their rights returned, not pre-7th October, but way before that. They're not calling for, this is the Palestinians now, the Palestinians, I've not said Hamas, who happen to be Palestinian. The Palestinians are not calling for the annihilation of the Israeli population and Israeli state. So we do not see a tone deafness from the Palestinians. And by extension, you do not see a tone deafness from pro-Palestinian support. When you look at the demonstrations, when you listen to the interviews that are taking place, you hear some speaking about a two-state solution. You see some saying the only solution is a one-state solution with Palestinians having the same rights as the Israelis and they're all living as one. That's what you hear from pro-Palestinian support, overwhelmingly. But again, media propaganda and the narrative of the right to defend themselves does not acknowledge this at all, because it's in their interest to continue to beat that drum of victimhood, to criminalize or marginalize those who call for ceasefire. Individuals have lost their jobs because they've called for ceasefire. Individuals have been cancelled on social media because they've called for ceasefire. They're calling for peace. And the counter narrative is the cause of this. Because what's being said and done, and we've seen that it's recently been legislated in the US. We saw a week or so ago Macron making similar calls that anti-Zionism does equate to anti-Semitism. And that could not be further from the truth. But what is being done, what the drive is to silence any commentary, any counter narrative to this pro-Zionist drive. Pro-Zionist, I didn't say pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist drive, hegemony, control, destruction. And I will conclude on this point here. Pro-Palestinian support is calling out the genocidal drive that is being supported by some Western governments and the silence of some Eastern governments. And this is very, very necessary and needs to continue. But that does not mean by default there is an ignoring, denial, marginalization of the plight of the Israelis. And I want to extend this. The Israelis following the 7th of October, and even preceding that from what took place historically with them. Because there's been a lot of support from Muslim quarters, from Palestinian quarters, an acknowledgement, support, and understanding of what the Israeli population's forebears endured in the 1940s. In the UK, we witnessed the same type of dehumanization that has been done to the Palestinians being done to the Jewish community in the UK, the turn of the 20th century, and across Europe. Media knows this, governments know this, but there's a selectivity, a selective amnesia in order to drive the Zionist agenda that is causing and contributing to what is happening not only in Gaza and West Bank now, but across the world.